Between 1940 and 1980, the most radical machines in farming history were built and then erased. One ran on jet fuel, one was recalled before most farmers ever saw it. One was America's first diesel farm tractor, built by a company almost nobody has ever heard of. These weren't failures. Some were the most advanced machines of their generation. So why did they vanish? Here are 10 tractors from farming's golden age that history almost completely forgot. Number 1. The RHS Shepard Diesel Tractor. Most people have never heard of this machine, and almost nobody outside of a very small collector community ever will. In 1949, a company based in Hanover, Pennsylvania called RHS Shepard unveiled something that should have changed American agriculture. Richard Sheppard had graduated from Dickinson College in 1933 and spent the following years building a small diesel engine manufacturing business, producing engines for generator sets, lifeboats, pumps, refrigerated railroad cars, and marine power units. He had a particular passion for diesel power and a belief that diesel was the future of farm tractors at a time when most American farmers still ran gasoline or distillate engines. In 1949, the Sheppard Company debuted 3 tractor models at the Pennsylvania Farm Fair. These were the SD1, SD2, and SD3. The SD standing not for Sheppard Diesel as many assumed, but for the first and last letters of Sheppard. The number indicated the plow rating and matched the number of engine cylinders. The SD3, a 3-cylinder machine rated at 32 belt horsepower, would become the most produced of all Sheppard models. What made these tractors genuinely historic was not their name or their appearance, it was their engine. The 3-cylinder Sheppard Diesel was, according to company records and confirmed by collectors, the first diesel tractor engine produced in the United States. Sheppard also built the first diesel-powered tractor fitted with a factory-installed power steering system, which appeared on the 4-cylinder SD4 in 1953. The patented firsts didn't stop there. Sheppard tractors were among the very first fitted with a backhoe, a front-end loader, cultivators, and planters as factory options. A torque converter with a 13-speed transmission was also developed, years before such sophistication would become industry standard. And yet the company stopped making tractors in 1956, after just 7 years of production. The reasons were straightforward and brutal. Because every Sheppard tractor was essentially handcrafted, the cost was high, significantly above competing machines from International Harvester and Ford, which had the scale advantages of mass production. Sheppard also refused to extend floor plan financing to their dealers, requiring cash purchases up front. This made dealers reluctant and inventory thin. When a recession hit mid-decade, and with International Harvester and Ford aggressively cutting prices to dominate market share, the handcrafted Sheppard simply could not survive on price. In total, only 1,943 Sheppard tractors were ever built across all 4 models: 14 SD1s, 257 SD2s, 1,441 SD3s, and 231 SD4s. Of the SD1, the tiny single-cylinder model, only around 17 were produced, and the last known sale of one went for $27,300 at auction in 2016. Only 3 SD1s are believed to still exist anywhere in the world. The RHS Shepard Company itself did not disappear. It pivoted to power steering components for heavy trucks and today employs over 900 people in Hanover, Pennsylvania. But its brief, extraordinary chapter as the builder of America's first diesel farm tractor is known only to a tight circle of collectors, a 7-year footnote in agricultural history that the rest of the world completely passed by. Number 2. The Allis-Chalmers Fuel Cell Tractor. This is the one that should have changed everything, and instead it was donated to a museum and largely forgotten for 60 years. Allis-Chalmers was one of the great American manufacturing companies, famous for the distinctive orange tractors that defined Midwestern farming for decades. In 1951, 8 years before anyone was talking about clean energy in any serious way, Allis-Chalmers began quietly researching fuel cells inside their laboratories. On October 15, 1959, near West Allis, Wisconsin, a team of engineers led by Harry Ehrig unveiled something the world had never seen. Built on a modified D10-D12 tractor chassis, this machine contained 1,008 individual fuel cells joined in 112 units of 9 cells each, arranged in 4 banks. Together, they produced 15 kilowatts of electricity that powered a standard 20-horsepower DC motor. The tractor plowed a field of alfalfa with a double-bottom plow. It ran without combustion, without smoke, without noise, without any internal combustion engine at all. This was the first fuel cell-powered vehicle in history. Not a concept drawing, not a scale model. A working machine that plowed a real field in Wisconsin in 1959. The technology was breathtaking, but the economics were impossible. Clean energy in 1959 simply could not compete with cheap diesel fuel. The tractor was far too expensive to put into production. So Allis-Chalmers did something remarkable. They donated the machine to the Smithsonian Institution. But the story didn't end there. The research Allis-Chalmers had done on fuel cells was later used in NASA's Apollo missions to the moon. The US military also contracted some of the company's experimental fuel cell equipment. Allis-Chalmers continued their fuel cell program until December 1970, when the loss of major contracts forced them to cut funding and sell the division to Teledyne Corporation. The tractor itself sat in Smithsonian storage for decades, largely unknown to the general public. It was later put on loan to the McLeod County Historical Society in Hutchinson, Minnesota, where it remains today. When hydrogen fuel cells began dominating global energy conversations in the 2000s and 2010s, engineers and historians were stunned to discover that a Wisconsin farm equipment company had already done it first, 60 years earlier in an alfalfa field with a machine most people had never heard of. Number 3. The International Harvester HT340. If you could build a tractor that sounded like a jet fighter, looked like a race car, and ran on virtually any fuel you could burn, would you? International Harvester did. In the 1950s and 60s, the gas turbine engine was the technology of the moment. Turbines had proved themselves in aviation, and engineers everywhere were asking the same question: what else could they power? International Harvester was in a unique position to answer that question, because they owned a subsidiary called the Solar Aircraft Company, a major manufacturer of turbine engines based in San Diego, California. International's engineers had already been experimenting with hydrostatic drive transmissions through the 1950s. Hydrostatic drive used hydraulic pumps and motors in place of traditional gears, allowing infinitely variable speed control with a single lever. The technology had proven itself in aviation during World War II. On a farm, it meant a driver could control all forward speeds with one lever rather than wrestling through a mechanical gear transmission. After a standard hydrostatic prototype, the HD340, tested successfully, someone had a bigger idea. What if they pulled the gasoline engine out and replaced it with one of Solar's jet turbine engines? The result, renamed the HT340 for hydrostatic turbine, made its public debut on July 20, 1961, at the University of Nebraska's 10th Annual Tractor Day in Lincoln. The audience was stunned. The machine looked nothing like any tractor anyone had ever seen. Aerodynamic fiberglass bodywork, a jet exhaust vent on top of the hood, a turbine air intake at the front, and hydraulic motors driving each rear wheel individually, eliminating the traditional differential and gearbox entirely. Its top speed was just 11 mph, but the visuals suggested something far faster. And then the turbine fired up. The 90-pound turbine engine produced 85 horsepower, a remarkable power-to-weight ratio. But it was brutally fuel-hungry, consuming roughly a gallon of kerosene or jet fuel every 5 minutes. It was also ear-splittingly loud, and the superheated exhaust was strong enough and hot enough that it could blast straight up from the hood even in high winds without blowing back on the driver, which was fortunate because it would have been a serious hazard if it did. The original HT340 was seriously damaged later in 1961 when the truck transporting it crashed after a bird flew into the cab. The remains were rebuilt and modified into the HT341, painted in red and white instead of the original blue and white, with added features including a 3-point hitch, stabilized steering, larger tires, and more lights. The HT341 was donated to the Smithsonian in 1967. What survived the HT340 program was not the turbine. It was the hydrostatic transmission itself. International Harvester introduced the hydrostatic transmission commercially in the IH656 Hydro Tractor in 1967. That technology remains in use on farm tractors to this day. The turbine tractor that demonstrated it is largely forgotten. Number 4. The John Deere 8010. Here is a tractor that was too big, too expensive, and too far ahead of its time, and Deere quietly made almost the entire production run disappear. In the fall of 1959, John Deere shocked the agricultural industry by unveiling the Model 8010, a massive articulated four-wheel drive tractor powered by a General Motors Detroit diesel six-cylinder engine, producing at least 150 horsepower at the drawbar. It could pull 8 plows at 7 miles per hour. In 1959, that was an almost incomprehensible amount of power for a farm tractor. No previous John Deere model had more than 2 cylinders. This machine had 6. The 8010 was also one of the most expensive farm tractors ever built, with a retail price in excess of $30,000, the equivalent of well over $200,000 in today's money. The tractor was put into production in 1960, and exactly 100 units were built. Farmers who had enthusiastically encouraged Deere to build such a machine went strangely quiet when the price tag was revealed. The 8010 proved almost completely unsellable at that price, and it took Deere 6 full years to move all 100 units. But here's the part that makes the 8010 truly lost. Deere recalled virtually every single one of them. The tractor had significant mechanical problems. The transmission was unreliable, the braking system was inadequate for the machine's massive weight, and the electrical system was problematic. Deere recalled all 100 tractors and converted them to the improved specification, renaming them the 8020. Almost every 8010 was mechanically upgraded and rebadged, erasing the 8010 designation from the physical machines. Today, only one known original specification 8010 prototype exists. A machine built in 1959 by a team of engineers and taken directly into heavy industrial testing. It was later used at the Waterloo factory in Iowa and spent years sitting in what its creator described as a bone pile behind the Deere foundry. It was eventually found, recognized, and preserved by collectors. The engineer who built it had assumed it was gone forever. The man who designed the original prototype was reunited with it 50 years after he built it. Of the 100 production units, all were converted to 8020s. The 8010 as produced barely existed in the world for a single year. Number 5. The Allis-Chalmers D19 High Crop Diesel. Most farmers in the 1960s knew about the Allis-Chalmers D19. Far fewer knew about its rarest variant, and today almost nobody does. The D19 itself was already historic. Introduced in 1961, it was the world's first farm tractor to come from the factory with a turbocharger installed as standard equipment. Allis-Chalmers took their 262 cubic inch 6-cylinder diesel engine, fitted a Thompson turbocharger to it, the same manufacturer that built the turbo for the Chevrolet Corvair Monza, and achieved approximately 67 PTO horsepower from a diesel. That was a significant jump from the naturally aspirated D17's 51 horsepower, and it set off a horsepower arms race that fundamentally changed American agriculture. International harvester John Deere and Massey Ferguson all followed with their own turbocharged models in the years that followed. About 10,591 D19s of all types were built. But the diesel version in high crop configuration, designed for use in row crops like sugarcane and rice, with 37 inches of ground clearance under the belly, was produced in extraordinarily tiny numbers. According to collectors who have documented these machines, Allis-Chalmers built only 56 diesel-powered D19 high-crop tractors in total. Only 56. Then there was a second configuration, even rarer still, the D19 high-crop in LP gas. Allis-Chalmers built only 9 D19 high-crop tractors in gas or LP configuration combined. In the collector community, only 5 of these 9 are confirmed to still exist. The other 4, as one collector put it, are probably lost to time or scrap. The standard D19 diesel had its own reliability problems. The engine was fragile under heavy loads, prone to cracked heads and dropped cylinder sleeves. Farmers who didn't know how to carefully manage a turbocharged diesel had real trouble with it. But the high crop variants, built in such tiny numbers, survived all of that reputation damage. They exist today as among the rarest production tractors of the entire post-war era. Most tractor enthusiasts, even serious ones, have never seen one in person. Number 6. The Minneapolis-Moline Uni-Tractor. Minneapolis-Moline was one of the most innovative tractor companies in American history, and they proved it repeatedly, sometimes ahead of the market, sometimes generations ahead. The Uni-Tractor was the latter. Introduced in the early 1950s, the Minneapolis-Moline Uni-Tractor was based on a radical premise. Instead of buying a different machine for every task, a farmer could buy one powered unit and then attach it to different implements: a harvester, a planter, a mower, swapping between them as the season demanded. Minneapolis-Moline's marketing team called the system all-in-one. In theory, it would eliminate the need to own multiple large tractors, one machine to rule the farm. The Uni-Tractor itself was a three-wheeled powered unit, which is part of why farmers gave it a nickname that stuck: the Minneapolis-Moline motorcycle. The design had a long heritage at the company, descended from the old Moline universal tractor concept, and Minneapolis-Moline had genuinely worked through the engineering. The system was not a gimmick. It could mate with a variety of functional implements and actually perform meaningful farm work. But farmers didn't want it. The concept of committing to a single power unit that required purpose-built proprietary implements was deeply unappealing to practical farm operators who had spent generations valuing flexibility and interchangeability. A machine that was all-in-one was also, in the eyes of many farmers, all or nothing. If the power unit broke down during harvest, everything stopped. Minneapolis-Moline sold the Uni-System design to New Idea in 1963 after White Motor Corporation had acquired the company. The Uni-Tractor quietly vanished from farm fields and from farming memory. The concept it pioneered, a single motorized power unit that can drive multiple interchangeable implements, is the precursor to ideas that are now embedded in precision agriculture and modern farm robotics. It was simply 5 decades too early for the infrastructure that would have made it practical. Number 7. The Lanz Bulldog. This is a machine so strange, so stubbornly primitive, and so extraordinarily capable that it defies easy description, and it was erased from farming history, not because it failed, but because the company that built it was swallowed by John Deere. The Lanz Bulldog was a German tractor built by Heinrich Lanz AG in Mannheim, Germany, beginning in 1921. By the time World War II ended, over 150,000 Bulldogs had been built, and they were working fields across Europe, Australia, Argentina, and beyond. But the post-war chapter of the Bulldog, the machines built between 1946 and 1960, is the one that virtually nobody outside Germany remembers. Almost none were imported into the United States. Most Americans today have never heard of the machine, and those who have seen one running live react to it the same way: stunned silence, followed by disbelief. Because the Lanz Bulldog ran on a single horizontal cylinder. 1. In the post-war models, that single cylinder displaced up to 10.3 liters, bigger than most car engines combined, in a single piston. The engine produced around 45 horsepower from a massive slow-turning two-stroke unit that ran at approximately 630 RPM. For comparison, modern engines run at 3,000 to 6,000 RPM. The Bulldog turned at barely 1/10 that speed. It also ran on virtually anything combustible: old engine oil, vegetable oil, kerosene, diesel, crude fuel oil, whatever the farmer could get hold of cheaply. This was not a marketing claim, it was a genuine mechanical property of the hot bulb ignition system, which ignited fuel through contact with a red-hot metal surface rather than a spark plug. Starting the pre-war hot bulb Bulldogs required heating the ignition bulb with a blowtorch until it glowed red, a process that could take up to half an hour in cold weather. After World War II, Lanz redesigned the engine progressively. A semi-diesel version appeared in 1952, followed by a true high-pressure diesel in 1955. Both still single-cylinder, both still horizontal. Despite this, the single-cylinder design caused farmers to experience significant vibration compared to the smoother multi-cylinder tractors competitors were producing. Sales fell. World War II had also hit Lanz catastrophically. Allied bombing destroyed approximately 90% of the Mannheim factory. Workers assembled tractors from spare parts in the rubble. Between 1946 and 1951, production resumed, but the Bulldog was fighting against time and technology. Multi-cylinder diesel tractors from international competitors were smoother, faster to start, and increasingly competitive in price. In 1956, John Deere purchased a controlling stake in Heinrich Lanz AG for approximately $5.3 million. Production continued for a few more years under the name John Deere Lanz, but in 1960, the Bulldog was discontinued. By then, over 200,000 had been built across the entire production life. The Lanz name quietly vanished from new tractors by 1965. The Bulldog had one more mechanical curiosity that no other tractor in history has matched. Because its engine had no valves, it could run equally well in either direction. To reverse the tractor, operators would simply slow the engine near a stop, then accelerate it again as the piston was positioned to kick the engine backwards. The direction indicator, sometimes the only gauge on the entire dashboard, would flip. The tractor went backward. Today in Germany, the Lanz Bulldog has a devoted collector following. In America, it is nearly completely unknown, a European farming legend that never crossed the Atlantic in meaningful numbers and whose disappearance was so quiet and so complete that the vast majority of American farmers from the era had no idea it ever existed. Number 8. The Oliver 2150. Here is a tractor killed not by mechanical failure, not by bad economics, and not by market indifference, but by corporate consolidation that erased an entire company's identity. The Oliver 2150 began production in April 1968, and from the start it was an unusual machine. Oliver had been purchased by White Motor Company back in October 1960. White had subsequently acquired Cockshut Tractors in Canada and Minneapolis-Moline in Minnesota. For several years, White maintained the three brand names separately, allowing each to retain its own engineering identity. But by 1968, the consolidation was accelerating, and the Oliver 2150 represented the last great expression of what Oliver could build before the brands were fully homogenized. The 2150 was powered by a 310 cubic inch turbocharged diesel, the Oliver Waukesha D310T, producing 105 PTO horsepower. It was the most powerful rear-drive tractor in the Oliver line. A row crop version and a wheatland version were available, with the wheatland model often equipped with optional dual 39-gallon auxiliary fuel tanks for the long distances of field work. A four-wheel drive version was also produced. Production ran for approximately 14 months, starting late in 1968 and ending early in 1969. In that short window, only 1,018 total units of all types were built. Of those, 373 were four-wheel drive versions. And because White was already rebadging tractors across its brand family, 112 of the listed 2150s were actually sold wearing Cockshut paint and nameplates. A handful of the very last units were sold as Oliver White machines, with both names on the badge, a signal that the end of the Oliver identity was imminent. By late 1969, White Motor Company reorganized into White Farm Equipment, and the new White 55 series emerged, which fully merged the Oliver and Minneapolis-Moline lines into a single brand-neutral product. The Oliver name continued for a few more years, but it was hollow. The engineering DNA was being homogenized out of existence. Today, the Oliver 2150 is one of the most overlooked tractors in the collector world, despite its extraordinary rarity. With only about 900 civilian units produced before rebadging, it is one of the shortest production run tractors from any major manufacturer of the post-war era. Number 9. The Minneapolis-Moline G706. Orange and yellow LP tractor. This one is so rare that documented examples can be counted on one hand. Minneapolis-Moline in the 1960s was already a company with a distinctive identity. Their prairie gold paint scheme, a warm yellow-orange that stood out on the horizon, was instantly recognizable across the Great Plains. But during this period, the company was also experimenting with market research in an unusual way. Minneapolis-Moline produced a small number of G706 tractors in an alternate orange and yellow color scheme, not their standard prairie gold, and took them to state fairs around the Midwest, where they ran polling contests asking farmers a deceptively simple question: what color do you like? These contest machines were not meant to be production tractors. They were market research tools on wheels. But because they were real functioning tractors, they were driven and worked. After the fair circuit ended, they were dispersed into the agricultural world and largely forgotten. The G706 LP gas version in the orange and yellow color was produced in quantities of approximately 3 machines total, 1 LP gas unit and 2 diesels in that specific color configuration. In the collector community, only one of these machines has been positively documented and verified in recent years. 2 others are believed to exist, but their locations are uncertain. The rest, if any were made beyond those 3, have never been found. This is not a production tractor with a failed model run. This is a machine so rare that its rarity was never even intentional. It existed to ask a question, did its job at the fairground, and then disappeared into the American countryside. Number 10. The Allis-Chalmers 8550. We end with a machine that died when its parent company died, and the death of Allis-Chalmers is one of the most consequential collapses in American industrial history. Allis-Chalmers had been building farm equipment since the late 1800s. Their orange tractors were as iconic as John Deere's green. Through the 1970s, the company competed seriously with the industry's biggest names, producing increasingly powerful models and constantly pushing the technology of the day. The 8550 was among the largest and most capable machines they ever built. A powerful 4-wheel drive tractor that represented the pinnacle of what Allis-Chalmers could produce in the early 1980s. But Allis-Chalmers was financially struggling through the late 1970s and into the 1980s. The agricultural economy, riding high through much of the 1970s when land prices soared and export markets boomed, collapsed sharply in the early 1980s. Farm debt crises hit farmers across the Midwest. Equipment purchases fell off a cliff. Companies that had expanded aggressively during the boom years found themselves overextended as the bust hit. In 1985, Allis-Chalmers sold its agricultural division to Deutz, a German manufacturer. The combined company became Deutz-Allis, then was sold again to a group of investors in 1990 and became AG Co., the company that today owns Fendt, Massey Ferguson, Challenger, and several other major brands. The Allis-Chalmers name, the orange paint, and the American identity of the company were gone. The 8550 and the other large tractors from that final era of genuine Allis-Chalmers production became orphans overnight. Machines still working American fields whose parent company had simply ceased to exist. Parts availability dwindled. Dealer networks dissolved. Farmers who had built their operations around the orange machines suddenly found themselves stranded. Today, the large 4-wheel drive Allis-Chalmers models from the late 1970s and early 1980s, including the 8550, are among the most overlooked machines at antique equipment shows. Their final chapter was written so quietly and so quickly that many people who were farming during that period barely registered that it had happened at all. One of the most storied names in American agriculture simply folded and took its biggest machines into obscurity with it. So that's it for today. If you like this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thanks for watching.